The ongoing debate over completion of the Keystone XL Pipeline has become larger than life, and some say even more significant than the actual project. A panel convened by the Wilson Center's Canada Institute attempted to sort through the debate and to understand how it's evolved and what it means. That's the focus of this edition of Rewind.
When Keystone was first proposed, no one in the United States thought that today one of the big issues in the oil patch was whether we were going to okay the export of domestically produced oil. 4 years ago, when the Keystone debate was really in its first flower, unemployment in the United States was 9.7%. And the jobs argument had a very powerful ring. But the current reality is that the jobs argument simply doesn't have that kind of power anymore.
When I look back and ask, why did Keystone become the be-all, end-all infrastructure project for this new kind of era in American environmentalism, it goes back to a column that James Hansen did. He made the same assumption that environmental groups working against the pipeline still make, which is that Keystone is the linchpin, the key to essentially getting the lion's share of the oil sands out of the ground. He used kind of that core assumption to say, well, if Keystone gets rejected, the oil sands essentially slow to a halt. The cost of extracting this heavy fuel becomes potentially untenable for most players in the industry. And if it gets built, it's a free-for-all and it's quote-unquote game over. We really kick into overdrive in the summer of 2011 when there's a White House sit-in, more than 1,000 people get arrested. And before you know it, there's just a stylistic shift that ends up, pushing the policy and the politics in a direction nobody could have predicted.
There's another thing that, at least for me, sets Keystone XL distinctly apart, in that this is the first time that I can remember that a Canadian government has made a specific project that it's going to champion as part of a national policy. But you don't hear the government saying, we don't care which refineries it goes to, and we don't care how it gets there. At least in terms of export to the United States, it's all about Keystone. And that's created, I think, political difficulties for the Canadian government because it doesn't look like it's championing a policy. It looks like it's championing a project.
Does it matter that there's been a lot of pipeline constructed elsewhere since this? I mean, it's sort of like we have this one thing that's sort of like the golden bullet and all this buildup all around us. And as you said, Elana, even if we kill the oil sands, it still relatively doesn't really matter.
So it's really not about just the oil going through Keystone, which maybe isn't a satisfying answer. But if there were an environmental group activist up here, they might say to you, well, does it also matter that a lot of oil sands spilled in Arkansas in 2013? Because that scared me. Moments like that, even though it's unconnected to TransCanada, causes a lot of agitation among these activists and really inspires them to fight harder.
I'm very interested in finding out the amount of influence this frustrated tar sands exportation agenda, especially for Harper's government, had on the recent sketchy, adaptation of the FIPA agreement with China as possibly another way to expedite getting tar sands product out.
But it is clear that the Canadian government has been saying for years now, if we can't deliver this oil to the Americans, and making it sound like the Americans need it, right? Because they keep saying, it won't be further exported. We'll send it elsewhere. It's almost been this implied threat that if you don't buy it from us, if you don't like us well enough to buy it, then we'll send it to India or China. Sometimes these things come because of accidents, the BP oil spill or some catastrophe somewhere, and people take a look at the bigger underlying issue. Sometimes they kind of get manipulated into totemic fashion. I think in the case of Keystone, it probably got manipulated perhaps by both sides into having an importance that nobody originally intended or expected. But the debate, this is a fundamental debate for the 21st century. And so there will be other there will be other totems that people focus on as that debate is worked through.
For more information, visit wilsoncenter.org. Click the Programs tab to find additional resources from the Wilson Center's Canada Institute.